The metal detector's shrill alarm cut through the morning air like a knife, freezing every person in the Pentagon's East Entrance security checkpoint. Colonel Rebecca Chen stepped back from the scanner, her weathered hands raised slightly as three armed guards converged on her position. Behind her, a line of high-ranking officials and defense contractors waited with barely concealed impatience, their morning briefings delayed by what appeared to be a simple security malfunction. "Ma'am, please step aside for secondary screening," the lead security officer commanded, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. His nameplate read Martinez, and his eyes held the particular suspicion reserved for anomalies in what should be routine procedures. Rebecca moved to the designated area without protest, her movements precise despite the early hour. She wore a simple charcoal business suit, unremarkable except for its impeccable tailoring and the way it seemed to accommodate someone accustomed to carrying concealed equipment. Her graying auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her face carried the kind of weathered composure that came from years of making decisions under pressure. "Empty your pockets completely," Officer Martinez instructed, producing a plastic tray. "Everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today?" Rebecca complied methodically. Wallet, keys, a small leather portfolio, and a peculiar challenge coin that caught the fluorescent light with an unusual gleam. The coin bore markings that Officer Martinez didn't recognize, not the standard military unit insignia he was familiar with, but something more complex, more official. "What's this?" he asked, turning the coin over in his palm. "A memento," Rebecca replied simply, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years giving orders that couldn't be questioned. The metal detector wand passed over her body with methodical precision, beeping insistently at her left shoulder. "Remove your jacket, please." Rebecca hesitated for the briefest moment, a pause so subtle that most wouldn't notice it, but Officer Martinez had been trained to catch such micro-expressions. Something flickered in her eyes, not fear exactly, but the careful calculation of someone weighing risks and options. She slipped off her jacket, revealing a cream-colored blouse that had clearly been tailored to accommodate the small, raised scar visible just above her collarbone. The kind of scar that suggested surgical intervention for trauma most civilians would never survive. But it wasn't the scar that made Officer Martinez's breath catch. It was what lay partially visible beneath the fabric of her blouse, just over her heart. A glimpse of what appeared to be an official seal, rendered in ink so precise and detailed that it could only have been applied by someone with the highest level of authorization. The eagle's talons were visible, clutching symbols that Officer Martinez couldn't quite make out, but the quality and positioning suggested something far beyond a typical military tattoo. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said, his voice taking on a different quality, "I'm going to need to see some additional identification." Rebecca's expression remained neutral, but something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. The subtle change from cooperative civilian to something else entirely, something that made the hair on Officer Martinez's neck stand at attention despite his inability to articulate exactly what he was sensing. "My credentials are in the portfolio," she said calmly. Officer Martinez opened the leather folder, expecting to find the usual collection of government identification cards, building access badges, and business cards that filled most Washington briefcases. Instead, he found a single document folder marked with classifications he'd never seen before, and below that, a military identification card that made his eyes widen. The ID showed Rebecca's photograph, but the rank designation made him look twice, then 3 times. Colonel Rebecca Chen, United States Air Force, with clearance levels that extended far beyond anything in his experience. But it was the unit designation that made him pause entirely. Assignment: Classified Executive Action Authority. "Colonel," Officer Martinez said, his entire demeanor transforming from suspicious security guard to something approaching deference. "Ma'am, I apologize for the delay. I wasn't aware of your rank." Rebecca accepted her identification back with the same calm efficiency she'd shown throughout the screening. "No apology necessary, officer. You were doing your job." But as she gathered her belongings and prepared to continue toward the Pentagon's inner corridors, Officer Martinez found himself studying her retreating figure with new eyes. The way she moved through the checkpoint wasn't just confident, it was the kind of spatial awareness that suggested someone accustomed to environments where a moment's inattention could prove fatal. "Colonel Chen," he called after her, curiosity overcoming protocol. "Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, what brings you to the Pentagon today?" Rebecca turned back, and for just a moment, Officer Martinez caught a glimpse of something in her expression that made him instinctively step back. Not hostility, but the kind of controlled intensity that suggested depths he couldn't begin to fathom. "I have an appointment," she said simply, "with people who've been waiting a very long time to hear what I have to say." As she disappeared into the Pentagon's labyrinthine corridors, Officer Martinez found himself staring at the challenge coin still sitting in the plastic tray. In his haste to process her legitimate credentials, he'd forgotten to return it. He picked it up, studying the intricate markings more carefully now. The symbols weren't random military insignia. They were something else entirely, a presidential seal so detailed and precise that it could only be authentic, surrounded by markings that suggested authorization at the highest levels of government. The kind of coin that wasn't simply issued, but earned through actions that would never appear in any public record. Officer Martinez pocketed the coin, making a mental note to return it when Colonel Chen exited the building. But something told him that their brief encounter was just the beginning of a story much larger than a routine security screening. In the Pentagon's secure corridors, Rebecca moved with the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly where she was going, even though she hadn't been inside this building in over 3 years. The muscle memory of classified briefings and emergency consultations guided her through turns and security checkpoints that would confuse most visitors. Her destination was Conference Room 2A347, a secure facility 3 levels below ground, where conversations took place that could alter the course of international relations without leaving any paper trail. As she approached the final security checkpoint, Rebecca mentally prepared herself for the questions that would inevitably come. Questions about where she'd been for the past 3 years. Questions about why someone with her background had been living quietly in suburban Maryland, working as a consultant for a small defense contracting firm, drawing no attention to herself or her extraordinary past. Most importantly, questions about why she'd finally chosen to surface now, carrying intelligence that could reshape everything the Pentagon thought it knew about recent international developments. The guard at the final checkpoint didn't recognize her face, but her credentials opened doors that most Pentagon personnel didn't even know existed. As the heavy steel door swung closed behind her, Rebecca allowed herself a moment to acknowledge the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. For 3 years, she'd maintained perfect operational silence, protecting sources and methods that remained active in some of the world's most dangerous locations. For 3 years, she'd watched international developments unfold while knowing details that could have prevented disasters, stopped conflicts, saved lives. But now, sitting in her jacket pocket, was intelligence too critical to remain classified. Information that had cost brave men and women their lives to obtain, and that would dishonor their sacrifice if it remained buried in the bureaucratic maze of plausible deniability. Rebecca straightened her shoulders and approached the conference room door, knowing that once she stepped inside, there would be no returning to the quiet anonymity she'd maintained since her last official operation. The woman who'd spent 3 years as a mild-mannered defense consultant was about to remember what it felt like to be Colonel Rebecca Chen, bearer of the Presidential Seal, executor of missions that officially never happened. The people waiting inside had no idea what was about to walk through their door. Conference Room 2A347 was designed to intimidate. The windowless chamber, 3 stories beneath the Pentagon's foundation, contained a polished mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs that had hosted conversations capable of reshaping global politics. Today, it held 5 men in expensive suits who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the unexpected addition to their morning agenda. Rebecca entered to find Deputy Secretary of Defense Harold Morrison already seated at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. To his right sat General Patrick Kellaway, whose chest bore enough ribbons to outfit a small parade and whose expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. The remaining seats were occupied by senior intelligence officials whose names rarely appeared in public documents. Gentlemen, Morrison began without preamble, this is Colonel Rebecca Chen. She's requested this emergency briefing regarding what she claims is critical intelligence from overseas operations. The word claims hung in the air like an accusation. Rebecca noted the deliberate emphasis, the skeptical glances exchanged around the table, the way Morrison had introduced her rank almost dismissively. She had expected this resistance, had in fact counted on it. Colonel Chen, General Kellaway spoke, consulting a tablet in front of him. According to our records, you've been on inactive status for the past 3 years. Your last official assignment was, well, it's heavily redacted, but it appears to have concluded unsuccessfully. Rebecca remained standing, having not been invited to sit. General, with respect, the classification levels of my previous assignments may not be accessible through standard personnel databases. A thin smile crossed Kellaway's face. Colonel, I have Umbra 7 clearance. There's very little in our system I can't access. Yes, sir. However, some operations require clearance designations that don't appear in standard hierarchies. Deputy Secretary Morrison leaned forward, his expression hardening. Colonel, we're extremely busy men. If you have legitimate intelligence to share, please proceed. If you're here to make vague claims about classified operations that conveniently can't be verified, you're wasting our time. Rebecca reached into her portfolio and withdrew a sealed envelope bearing classifications that made the men around the table lean forward despite their skepticism. She placed it on the mahogany surface, but kept her hand resting on top. The intelligence I'm about to share came at the cost of 7 lives, she said quietly. American operatives who died believing their sacrifice would protect national security. Before I reveal details that could compromise ongoing operations, I need assurance that this information will be acted upon appropriately. CIA Deputy Director James Hartwell, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke for the first time. Colonel, you're in no position to set conditions for sharing intelligence. If you have actionable information, you're obligated to present it. Rebecca's expression remained neutral, but something in her posture shifted, a subtle straightening that suggested the cooperative civilian facade was beginning to wear thin. Deputy Director, the operatives who died obtaining this intelligence weren't my subordinates. They were my responsibility. That responsibility doesn't end with their death. General Kellaway's patience was clearly wearing thin. Colonel Chen, I'm going to be direct. According to our records, your last assignment was a disaster. Operation Silent Harbor resulted in the loss of an entire team, the compromise of multiple assets, and an international incident that took months to contain diplomatically. The accusation hit the room like a physical blow. Rebecca's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the envelope, but her voice remained steady. General, Silent Harbor was classified at levels above your clearance. The public records you're referencing were deliberately falsified to protect sources and methods that remain active. Morrison's expression darkened. Colonel, now you're suggesting that official Pentagon records are falsified? That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, sir. It's standard protocol for certain types of operations. Hartwell removed his glasses and cleaned them with deliberate slowness. Colonel Chen, let me be direct. You've been out of active service for 3 years. You're claiming to possess intelligence that you obtained through unofficial channels, and you're suggesting that our personnel records are deliberately inaccurate. This sounds less like a briefing and more like the ramblings of someone who's lost touch with reality. The insult was carefully calibrated, designed to provoke a response that would justify dismissing her entirely. Rebecca absorbed it without visible reaction, though the men around the table might have noticed the way her breathing remained perfectly controlled, the kind of breath control that came from training most of them had only read about in classified manuals. Furthermore, Morrison continued, building on Hartwell's attack, the idea that someone of your rank would have access to intelligence of the magnitude you're suggesting is frankly absurd. You're a colonel, not a cabinet-level official. You don't negotiate with heads of state or oversee strategic operations. Rebecca's silence stretched longer than comfort allowed. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a quality that made the room's temperature seem to drop several degrees. Deputy Secretary Morrison, what makes you believe you understand the scope of my previous assignments? Morrison's face flushed red. Colonel, I've been in this building for 15 years. I know exactly what kind of operations colonels are authorized to conduct, and they don't include the level of access you're claiming. And if I told you that assumption was incorrect? General Kellaway slammed his hand on the table with enough force to make the water glasses jump. Enough! Colonel Chen, you're speaking to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Your tone is completely inappropriate for an officer of your rank. Rebecca's gaze moved deliberately around the table, meeting each man's eyes in turn. What they saw there wasn't defiance or anger, but something far more unsettling, the kind of calm certainty that belonged to someone who had operated in environments where the wrong word could mean death. General, I'm speaking to officials who are making decisions based on incomplete information. That puts American lives at risk. Hartwell leaned back in his chair with visible disgust. This is ridiculous. Morrison, why are we wasting time with someone who's obviously suffering from delusions of grandeur? Colonel Chen, you're dismissed. Rebecca didn't move. Instead, she slowly unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of her blouse, revealing more of the intricate marking that had caught Officer Martinez's attention at security. The men around the table found themselves staring at what was unmistakably a presidential seal, rendered in ink so detailed and precise that it could only be authentic. Gentlemen, Rebecca said quietly, I think there's been a misunderstanding about who you're speaking with. The room fell absolutely silent. Morrison's face had gone pale, while General Kellaway was staring at the marking with the expression of someone trying to process information that didn't fit his worldview. That's, Hartwell began, then stopped, his voice trailing off. Impossible? Rebecca finished. Yes, I imagine it would seem that way to someone who didn't know such authorizations existed. Morrison found his voice first. Where did you get that marking? Rebecca's smile was cold and professional. I didn't get it anywhere, Deputy Secretary. It was earned through operations conducted under direct presidential authority. Operations that bypass normal military channels, because normal channels can't contain their scope or implications. General Kellaway was now leaning forward, studying the presidential seal with the intensity of someone who understood its significance even if he didn't want to believe it. Presidential Executive Action Authority, he said slowly. Those programs are theoretical. They don't actually exist. General, Rebecca replied, with respect, you're wrong. Approaching dread, the 5 senior officials stared at Rebecca Chen as though she had materialized from thin air, which, in a very real sense, she had. People with Presidential Executive Action Authority didn't simply walk into Pentagon briefings unannounced. Deputy Secretary Morrison was the first to recover his composure, though his voice carried a tremor that hadn't been present moments earlier. Colonel, assuming that marking is authentic, and I'm not conceding that it is, it would mean you've operated outside normal command structures for years. Correct. Under whose direct authority? Rebecca's expression remained neutral. I'm not authorized to discuss the chain of command for executive action operations. What I can tell you is that the intelligence I'm carrying requires immediate action at the highest levels. General Kellaway had produced his own secure tablet and was frantically entering search parameters into classified databases. His face grew progressively paler as he read whatever information was appearing on his screen. Jesus Christ, he whispered, then looked up at Rebecca with entirely different eyes. There are protocols in place for verifying executive action operatives, security measures that were implemented after the Beijing incident in 2018, Rebecca finished smoothly. When a compromised communication system led to the exposure of 3 deep cover assets. The new verification protocols require biometric confirmation and a 17-digit authentication sequence that changes every 72 hours. Kellaway's tablet confirmed what she'd just recited verbatim from highly classified security documentation. Information that wouldn't be available to anyone without the highest level of access. CIA Deputy Director Hartwell was now studying Rebecca with the intense focus of someone reassessing everything he thought he knew. The Beijing incident is classified beyond my clearance level. How do you know those details? Because I was there, Deputy Director. I was one of the 3 assets who had to be extracted when the communication system was compromised. Hartwell's expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching alarm. The Beijing incident had been a catastrophic intelligence failure that had reshuffled the entire Asian operational structure. If this woman had been directly involved, Morrison cleared his throat, clearly struggling to regain control of a briefing that had spiraled far beyond his expectations. Colonel, even assuming your credentials are legitimate, you've been out of contact for 3 years. How do we know the intelligence you're carrying isn't outdated or compromised? Rebecca reached into her portfolio and withdrew a small electronic device that none of the men recognized. She placed it on the table and activated it with her thumbprint. A holographic display materialized above the device, showing real-time satellite footage of a military installation in Eastern Europe. This footage was recorded 18 hours ago, she said. The installation you're looking at doesn't appear on any NATO intelligence assessments because it's been constructed using advanced stealth technology that makes it invisible to conventional surveillance. The men around the table leaned forward, studying the images with growing concern. The installation was massive, clearly designed for strategic operations and completely unknown to Western intelligence. How did you obtain this? Morrison demanded. Through assets I've maintained independently for the past 3 years, assets who have been tracking developments that your conventional intelligence networks haven't detected. General Kellaway was comparing the footage to information on his tablet, his expression growing increasingly troubled. These coordinates, they're in a region we've been monitoring. Our satellites show nothing but agricultural land. Because you're looking with the wrong kind of eyes, General. Rebecca manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific frequencies and wavelengths. This installation uses adaptive camouflage technology that responds to satellite surveillance in real time. It literally becomes invisible to conventional imaging. Hartwell was now taking rapid notes, his earlier dismissiveness completely forgotten. Who's operating this facility? That's where the intelligence becomes problematic, Rebecca replied. The facility is jointly operated by Russian strategic forces and a private military contractor with ties to several NATO member nations. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. Morrison's face went white while Kellaway began furiously typing on his tablet, cross-referencing intelligence reports and strategic assessments. You're suggesting active collusion between Russian military forces and Western private contractors? Morrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not suggesting anything, Deputy Secretary. I'm providing photographic evidence of joint training exercises, shared communication systems, and coordinated operational planning. Rebecca manipulated the display again, showing footage of personnel in mixed uniforms conducting tactical exercises together. My God, Hartwell breathed, studying faces in the imagery. Some of those contractors, I recognize them. They've held security clearances with multiple NATO countries. Rebecca nodded grimly. The network is extensive, well-funded, and operates with near-complete immunity because it involves personnel from multiple allied nations. Any attempt to investigate through conventional channels would be blocked by diplomatic immunity and international jurisdiction issues. General Kellaway looked up from his tablet with an expression of dawning horror. The Syrian operation last month, the one where our intelligence was compromised before we even deployed. If there's an active network sharing information, General, the Syrian compromise was just the beginning, Rebecca said quietly. The intelligence I'm carrying details planned operations that would destabilize the entire Mediterranean strategic balance, operations scheduled to begin within the next week. The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a funeral shroud. These weren't historical intelligence failures to be analyzed and filed away. This was active, ongoing betrayal with immediate strategic consequences. Morrison stood abruptly, pacing to the far wall where a secure communication terminal waited. I need to contact the Secretary of Defense immediately. This intelligence needs to reach the highest levels within the hour. Deputy Secretary, Rebecca said, her voice carrying a note of warning. The network I've been tracking includes individuals with access to the highest levels of government communication. Using conventional channels would compromise the intelligence before it could be acted upon. Morrison froze with his hand halfway to the communication terminal. You're saying our secure communications are compromised? I'm saying the network has access to personnel with authorized monitoring capabilities for multiple government communication systems, the same capabilities used to prevent terrorist communications from reaching their targets. Hartwell was now studying Rebecca with new understanding. You've been operating independently to avoid detection by the very systems designed to protect us. Correct. For the past 3 years, I've maintained operational security by staying completely outside official channels. No government communications, no official travel, no contact with active intelligence personnel. General Kellaway set down his tablet and looked directly at Rebecca. Colonel, forgive my earlier skepticism. If what you're telling us is accurate, you've been conducting a solo intelligence operation against a network that has penetrated our most secure systems. Rebecca's expression softened slightly, the first hint of the person beneath the operational facade. General, I haven't been conducting an operation. I've been trying to stay alive long enough to deliver intelligence that 7 good people died to obtain. The personal cost was evident in her voice, and the men around the table suddenly understood that they weren't just looking at an intelligence briefing. They were looking at the conclusion of a 3-year survival mission that had cost lives, destroyed careers, and isolated this woman from everything she'd once known. Morrison returned to his seat, his hand still trembling slightly. Colonel Chen, what exactly are you asking us to do? Rebecca deactivated the holographic display and returned the device to her portfolio. I'm asking you to listen to the complete intelligence briefing, understand the scope of what we're facing, and then help me contact the only person with sufficient authority to act on this information. Who? Rebecca's hand moved unconsciously to the presidential seal visible beneath her blouse. The person who originally authorized my operation, the person who sent me into the darkness 3 years ago and has been waiting for me to return with answers. Hartwell leaned forward intently. You're talking about direct contact with the president? I'm talking about completing a mission that began with a handshake in the Oval Office and a promise that certain truths would be preserved regardless of the cost. The room fell silent again as the magnitude of Rebecca's situation became clear. This wasn't just an intelligence operative with valuable information. This was someone who had been personally tasked by the President of the United States with a mission so sensitive that it couldn't exist within normal government structures. General Kellaway broke the silence with a question that voiced what everyone was thinking. Colonel, if you've had direct presidential authorization all along, why come to us? Why not go directly to the White House? Rebecca's smile was tired but determined. Because, General, after 3 years in the shadows, I needed to remind myself what it felt like to be called by my rank again. I needed to remember that I'm still a United States Air Force colonel before I become something else entirely. She stood, gathering her portfolio with the same precise movements she'd displayed throughout the briefing. And because once I walk into that final meeting, Colonel Rebecca Chen disappears forever. This was my chance to say goodbye to the woman I used to be. The emergency klaxon that pierced through conference room 2A347 was a sound none of the assembled officials had heard in years. 3 sharp blasts followed by a continuous wail, the Pentagon's highest-level security alert, the sound that meant imminent threat to national security, the kind that could alter the course of history in minutes rather than hours. Red lights began flashing throughout the windowless chamber as the secure communication terminal erupted with incoming priority messages. General Kellaway was first to the terminal, his face growing increasingly pale as he absorbed the flood of intelligence reports cascading across multiple screens. Jesus Christ, he breathed, then turned to face the room with an expression of barely controlled panic. We have multiple simultaneous security breaches across Eastern Europe. NATO command is reporting coordinated attacks on communication infrastructure in Poland, Estonia, and Romania. Deputy Secretary Morrison was already moving toward the door. I need to get to the National Security Council immediately. This briefing is suspended. Sir, Kellaway interrupted, his voice tight with urgency. There's more. The attacks are using tactical signatures that match classified NATO operational plans that were supposed to be known only to senior command staff. The implication hit the room like a physical blow. Rebecca remained seated, but her posture had shifted subtly. The cooperative briefing participant had been replaced by something else entirely, an operator whose mind was already running threat assessments and tactical calculations. Hartwell was frantically working his own secure tablet, cross-referencing intelligence reports with databases most Pentagon personnel didn't know existed. "The timing can't be coincidental," he said, looking up at Rebecca with new understanding. "This is connected to the intelligence you were trying to share." "Deputy Director," Rebecca said quietly, "it's not connected. It's the opening move." Morrison froze halfway to the door. "What do you mean?" Rebecca stood with fluid precision and moved to the communication terminal, her fingers dancing across the interface with the speed and confidence of someone who had operated similar systems under combat conditions. Data began flowing across the screens, not the standard intelligence feeds the Pentagon officials were accustomed to, but something far more detailed and comprehensive. "The network I've been tracking has been planning this operation for 18 months, she explained, manipulating data streams with expert efficiency. "What you're seeing isn't a response to failed diplomacy or regional tensions. It's a coordinated destabilization effort designed to trigger specific NATO response protocols." "How the hell are you accessing those systems?" Kellaway demanded, staring at intelligence feeds that shouldn't have been available through Pentagon terminals. Rebecca's fingers continued moving across the interface without pause. "General, executive action operatives maintain independent access to critical systems specifically for situations like this. When conventional intelligence channels are compromised, someone needs to be able to operate outside normal procedures." On the main display, a tactical map materialized showing the affected regions of Eastern Europe. But unlike the standard NATO intelligence assessment, this map displayed additional information: troop movements, communication patterns, and strategic positioning that painted a far more comprehensive picture of what was unfolding. "My God," Morrison whispered, studying the display. "This isn't random terrorism or regional conflict. This is a precision military operation designed to force NATO into specific defensive positions," Rebecca finished, "positions that will expose critical vulnerabilities in our Baltic Sea strategic coverage." Hartwell was comparing Rebecca's intelligence to his own classified feeds, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Colonel, the intelligence you're displaying, some of this is more current than what we're receiving through official channels. How is that possible?" Rebecca paused her work at the terminal and turned to face the assembled officials. For the first time since entering the conference room, she allowed her professional mask to slip slightly, revealing glimpses of the enormous strain she'd been carrying. "Deputy Director, for the past 3 years, I've been operating a deep cover intelligence network that exists completely outside NATO command structures. The assets I've been coordinating have been positioned specifically to monitor the network responsible for today's attacks." "You've been running an unauthorized intelligence operation on Allied soil." Morrison's voice carried both horror and admiration. "Not unauthorized, Deputy Secretary. Authorized at the highest possible level specifically because conventional authorization would have been detected and countered by the network we were investigating." General Kellaway was studying the tactical display with growing understanding. "The Syrian operation, the compromised intelligence. How many of our recent failures have been because of this network?" Rebecca's expression darkened. "General, over the past 2 years, the network has had advanced knowledge of 17 NATO operations. 7 have been completely compromised, resulting in casualties. The remaining 10 have been allowed to proceed with limited success to maintain the illusion that security hasn't been breached." The full scope of the betrayal was beginning to register. Hartwell set down his tablet with shaking hands. "You're telling us that for 2 years, NATO operations have been compromised by a network that includes personnel with access to our highest level planning?" "Correct. And today's operation is designed to be the network's final play, a coordinated attack that will force NATO into defensive positions that expose our strategic nuclear assets in the Baltic region to direct targeting." Morrison's face had gone completely white. "Are you saying this is a prelude to nuclear confrontation?" I'm saying this is designed to create the conditions where nuclear confrontation becomes the only viable response to prevent complete strategic collapse in Eastern Europe. The implications were staggering. The room fell silent except for the continued wail of emergency klaxons and the steady stream of crisis communications flowing through the terminal. These weren't just regional security concerns anymore. This was the opening moves of a scenario that could escalate to global nuclear conflict within hours. Kellaway broke the silence with a question that voiced what everyone was thinking. "Colonel, if you've known this was coming, why didn't you warn us sooner?" Rebecca's expression carried the weight of someone who had been forced to make impossible choices. "General, the network includes personnel with access to Pentagon communications. Any attempt to warn through conventional channels would have been detected and countered. The network would have simply accelerated their timeline." "So you waited until they were already moving?" "I waited until I could provide not just warning, but the complete intelligence package necessary to counter their operation effectively." Rebecca turned back to the terminal. "What's happening right now isn't just an attack, gentlemen. It's an opportunity." Hartwell leaned forward intently. "What kind of opportunity?" Rebecca's fingers resumed their work at the interface, bringing up new displays that showed communication intercepts, financial transfers, and operational planning documents that painted a comprehensive picture of the network's structure and leadership. For the first time in 3 years, the network is fully active and exposed. Their operational security has been compromised by the necessity of coordinating simultaneous attacks across multiple countries. We have a window of approximately 4 hours to identify, track, and neutralize the entire network before they can disperse and rebuild. Morrison was studying the intelligence feeds with growing amazement. "This is comprehensive, more detailed than anything I've seen from our combined intelligence services." "Deputy Secretary, this represents 3 years of deep cover operation by assets who have sacrificed everything to obtain this intelligence. 7 people have died to get us to this moment." General Kellaway was frantically working his secure communications, trying to coordinate with NATO command structures that were struggling to respond to the ongoing crisis. "Colonel, even if this intelligence is accurate, our response time is limited by conventional command structures. It takes hours to coordinate international military responses." Rebecca's smile was cold and professional. "General, who said anything about conventional responses?" She activated a different interface on the communication terminal, one that none of the Pentagon officials recognized. Instead of standard NATO communication protocols, this system displayed direct access to assets and resources that operated outside normal military hierarchies. "The network I've been coordinating doesn't just provide intelligence," Rebecca explained. "It includes operational assets positioned throughout Eastern Europe specifically for rapid response scenarios." Hartwell was staring at the display with something approaching awe. "You're talking about a parallel military structure, assets that can respond immediately without going through NATO command." "I'm talking about executive action authority, Deputy Director. The ability to respond to threats that move faster than conventional diplomatic and military processes can handle." Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. "How many assets are we talking about?" Rebecca's fingers moved across the interface, highlighting positions throughout the tactical area. 47 deep cover operatives, 12 rapid response teams, and access to strategic resources that officially don't exist. "Jesus," Kellaway breathed. "You've been operating what amounts to a private military force under direct presidential authority." "General, I've been preparing for exactly this scenario. The intelligence we've gathered, the assets we've positioned, the response capabilities we've developed, everything has been building toward this moment. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one." The emergency klaxons continued their urgent wail as Rebecca worked with practiced efficiency to coordinate a response that would have been impossible through conventional channels. On the displays around her, the scope of her 3-year operation was becoming clear. Not just intelligence gathering, but the careful construction of response capabilities designed specifically for this crisis. "Colonel," Morrison said slowly, "what exactly are you asking us to do?" Rebecca paused in her work and turned to face the assembled officials. Her expression carried the weight of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years and who understood that the next few hours would determine whether her sacrifices had been worthwhile. Deputy Secretary, I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm telling you what needs to happen, and I'm giving you the opportunity to coordinate official response with the actions I'm about to authorize independently. The transformation in conference room 2A347 was visible and immediate. Where moments earlier Rebecca had been treated as a questionable intelligence source, she now commanded the room with undeniable authority. The Pentagon officials found themselves witnesses to something they'd only read about in theoretical documents, executive action authority being exercised in real time. General Kellaway was the first to fully grasp what he was seeing. As Rebecca coordinated responses across multiple screens simultaneously, speaking in rapid tactical communications with assets positioned throughout Eastern Europe, he began to understand the true scope of the operation she'd been conducting. "My God," he murmured to Morrison, "she's not just reporting intelligence, she's commanding an active operation across multiple countries." Morrison nodded grimly, watching Rebecca manage resource deployment with the precision of someone who had been planning for this exact scenario. The question is, how long has this been authorized? How long has she been operating with this level of independent authority? Their answer came as Rebecca paused in her communications to address a specific tactical question from what appeared to be a team leader in Estonia. Her response was delivered in fluent Estonian, followed immediately by tactical instructions in Polish, then a brief confirmation in what sounded like Russian. Hartwell looked up from his own intelligence feeds with new understanding. She's not just coordinating assets, she's speaking their languages natively. How many languages does she speak? Enough, Rebecca replied without turning from her work, having overheard the question. When you're operating deep cover across Eastern Europe for 3 years, linguistic flexibility becomes a survival skill. General Kellaway was now studying Rebecca's tactical coordination with professional admiration. Her ability to maintain awareness of multiple simultaneous operations while adapting to rapidly changing circumstances spoke to training and experience that went far beyond conventional military preparation. "Colonel," he said carefully, "the level of operational control you're displaying, this isn't something that can be maintained by a single officer, regardless of training." Rebecca's hands paused momentarily on the interface. "You're correct, General. It can't be maintained by a single officer operating alone." She activated a different communication channel, and the main display shifted to show a secure video conference connection. Suddenly, the conference room was looking at 4 individuals in different locations, clearly intelligence operatives positioned throughout the crisis zone, but reporting directly to Rebecca with the immediate responsiveness that suggested years of coordinated operation. "Gentlemen," Rebecca announced to both the room and the video conference, "meet the core team that has been tracking this network for 3 years." The lead operative, a woman with intense eyes and tactical gear, spoke first. "Phoenix Base, this is Eagle Eye and Talon. We have visual confirmation of the network leadership gathering at the previously identified location. Request permission to initiate tracking protocols." Rebecca responded immediately. "Eagle Eye, tracking authorized. Maintain visual contact but do not engage until the complete leadership structure is in place." A second operative, male, bearded, positioned what appeared to be a rooftop somewhere in Poland, reported next. "Phoenix Base, Raven's Nest in Warsaw. The communication intercepts are confirmed. The network is using NATO frequency protocols obtained through the compromised intelligence channels. Raven's Nest, continue monitoring. Feed all intercepts through the secure analysis system." Hartwell was staring at the coordinated operation with growing amazement. "Colonel, these assets, how long have they been in position?" "The current team has been operational for 14 months, Rebecca replied, simultaneously managing multiple information streams. "It takes time to establish the kind of deep cover necessary to penetrate a network this sophisticated." Morrison was beginning to understand the magnitude of what he was witnessing. "You've been operating a multinational intelligence network under independent authority. The resources required, the coordination necessary. The budget alone would be enormous." Rebecca's smile was brief but telling. Deputy Secretary, executive action operations don't appear in conventional budget documents. They're funded through mechanisms that operate outside normal appropriation processes. General Kellaway leaned forward intently. Black budget operations, completely off-book, no congressional oversight. General, some threats move faster than legislative processes can handle. The authorization I carry allows for response to such threats without the delays that normal oversight would require. A third operative appeared on the video conference, this one clearly positioned inside a building with sophisticated communication equipment visible in the background. Phoenix Base, this is Shadow in Riga. We have confirmation that the network's communication hub is preparing to transmit final operational orders. Estimated time to transmission, 37 minutes. The urgency in the room ratcheted up immediately. Morrison looked to Rebecca with something approaching desperation. 37 minutes to what? Rebecca's expression hardened. 37 minutes until the network transmits the final coordinates for strategic targeting in the Baltic region. Once those coordinates are transmitted, NATO will be forced to respond with nuclear-capable systems to prevent complete strategic collapse. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Hartwell set down his tablet with shaking hands. You're saying we have 37 minutes to prevent nuclear escalation? I'm saying we have 37 minutes to capture the network leadership and prevent them from triggering a nuclear response that would benefit their strategic objectives. General Kellaway was now studying the tactical displays with intense focus. Colonel, the assets you have in position, are they sufficient to conduct capture operations against what appears to be a sophisticated and well-defended network? Rebecca's response was interrupted by an urgent communication from one of her operatives. Phoenix Base, Eagle Eye and Talon, we have a problem. Additional security personnel are arriving at the target location. Military-grade equipment, professional movement patterns. This isn't private security. Rebecca's fingers flew across the interface, bringing up additional intelligence feeds. Eagle Eye, what's your assessment of the additional security? Professional military personnel, likely Spetsnaz or equivalent training. They're establishing a perimeter that suggests they're expecting an assault. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The network wasn't just transmitting final operational orders, they were preparing for a direct confrontation that suggested they knew about Rebecca's operation. Morrison's voice was tight with concern. Colonel, if they know about your assets, this could be a trap. Rebecca was studying multiple intelligence feeds simultaneously, her mind working through tactical calculations with speed and precision that spoke to years of operational experience. It's not a trap, Deputy Secretary. It's a desperate defensive measure. How can you be sure? Rebecca turned to face the assembled officials, and for the first time since the crisis began, her expression showed something approaching satisfaction. Because for 3 years, we've been feeding them false intelligence about our capabilities and positioning. They think they know where my assets are located. They're wrong. General Kellaway's eyes widened with understanding. You've been running a deception operation within your intelligence operation. General, when you're tracking a network that has penetrated the highest levels of Allied intelligence, deception becomes a survival necessity. My assets have been operating under multiple layers of false identity specifically for this scenario. Hartwell was beginning to grasp the scope of the strategic thinking that had gone into Rebecca's operation. The intelligence you've been sharing with us, some of it was deliberately inaccurate to test for leaks within our own systems. Deputy Director, every briefing I've conducted today has been monitored through multiple channels to identify which information reaches the network and how quickly. We now know which of your communication systems are compromised and which personnel have been sharing information inappropriately. The revelation was staggering. Morrison stared at Rebecca with something between admiration and horror. You've been using this briefing as an operational test to identify security breaches within the Pentagon itself. Deputy Secretary, I've been using every resource at my disposal to ensure that when we move against this network, we do so with complete operational security and maximum strategic advantage. A new voice came through the video conference, the fourth operative, whose position wasn't immediately clear from the background. Phoenix Base, This is Spectre in position. Overwatch confirms that the target location has been completely mapped. We have clear lines of engagement for all primary objectives. Rebecca nodded grimly. Spectre, maintain Overwatch position. Wait for my signal. General Kellaway was studying the coordination between Rebecca and her team with professional awe. Colonel, the level of operational control you're maintaining, this is equivalent to commanding a combined special operations task force. General, that's exactly what I've been doing. The only difference is that this task force operates outside normal military hierarchies, because normal hierarchies have been compromised. Morrison's secure phone began ringing with the distinctive tone that indicated direct contact from the highest levels of government. He answered immediately, listened briefly, then looked at Rebecca with an expression that mixed relief and concern. That was the White House, he announced to the room. The president wants to speak with you immediately. Rebecca's hand moved unconsciously to the presidential seal visible beneath her blouse. After 3 years of operating in the shadows, the moment she'd been preparing for had finally arrived. Gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had earned the right to speak directly to the most powerful person on Earth, it's time to close the circle. The secure communication system that connected conference room 2A347 directly to the Oval Office was activated with protocols that none of the assembled Pentagon officials had ever witnessed. As the screen flickered to life, revealing the unmistakable interior of the president's private office, the weight of what they were witnessing became impossible to deny. President Sarah Caldwell appeared on screen, her expression carrying the controlled intensity of someone managing multiple international crises simultaneously. Behind her, senior White House staff moved with urgent purpose, handling communications and intelligence reports that would reshape global strategic calculations within hours. Colonel Chen, the president said, her voice cutting through the tension in the Pentagon conference room with unmistakable recognition and authority. It's good to see you again. The simple greeting carried implications that sent shockwaves through every person in the room. This wasn't a formal introduction between strangers. This was a reunion between two people who clearly had extensive previous contact at the highest levels of classified operations. Madam President, Rebecca responded, her posture automatically shifting to attention, despite being 3 levels underground and hundreds of miles away. I'm ready to provide the complete operational briefing. Before we begin, President Caldwell said, her gaze moving beyond Rebecca to encompass the Pentagon officials who were staring in stunned silence. I want to acknowledge the other personnel present. Deputy Secretary Morrison, General Kellaway, Deputy Director Hartwell. You've been patient with Colonel Chen's rather unconventional briefing methods. Morrison found his voice first, though it carried a tremor that betrayed his struggle to process what he was witnessing. Madam President, we had no idea that Colonel Chen was operating under direct presidential authority. President Caldwell's expression hardened slightly. Deputy Secretary, that was intentional. 3 years ago, Colonel Chen accepted an assignment that required her to operate completely outside normal government channels. What she's accomplished in that time has prevented multiple international conflicts and saved thousands of lives. General Kellaway was staring at the screen with the expression of someone recalibrating everything he thought he understood about military command structures. Madam President, if I may ask, what level of authority has Colonel Chen been operating under? General, Colonel Chen has been operating under Presidential Executive Action Authority Level 1, the highest level of independent operational authorization available under classified executive protocols. The implications were staggering. Hartwell looked between the screen and Rebecca with new understanding. Level 1 authorization. That's theoretical. It's discussed in classified documents, but I didn't think it was ever actually implemented. Deputy Director, President Caldwell replied, Level 1 authorization is implemented when threats emerge that move faster than conventional government response mechanisms can handle. Colonel Chen has been tracking and preparing to counter such a threat for 3 years. On the communication displays around Rebecca, her operatives continued coordinating the response to the ongoing crisis in Eastern Europe. But now the Pentagon officials understood that they weren't just watching an unauthorized intelligence operation. They were witnessing the execution of a presidential directive that had been 3 years in the planning. "Colonel Chen," President Caldwell continued, "please provide your operational status report." Rebecca turned to address both the president and the officials in the room. "Madam President, the network we've been tracking has initiated their final operational phase. Coordinated attacks across Eastern Europe designed to force NATO into defensive positions that expose strategic vulnerabilities." "Timeline to critical decision point?" Rebecca checked the displays showing real-time intelligence from her positioned assets. 24 minutes until the network transmits targeting coordinates that would necessitate nuclear response to prevent strategic collapse in the Baltic region. The president's expression grew grim. "And your assessment of our ability to prevent that transmission?" "Madam President, we have assets in position to neutralize the network leadership and secure their communication systems. However, the operation requires authorization to engage with lethal force against personnel who may include citizens of allied nations." The weight of this decision was evident on President Caldwell's face. Morrison leaned forward intently. "Madam President, are we talking about authorizing military action against Allied personnel on Allied soil?" "Deputy Secretary," the President replied, "we're talking about authorizing action against a criminal network that has infiltrated Allied intelligence services and is actively working to trigger nuclear confrontation for profit." General Kellaway was studying the tactical displays with growing understanding. The Syrian operation, the compromised intelligence reports, the strategic failures. This network has been behind all of it? Rebecca nodded grimly. "General, for 2 years, this network has been selling NATO operational intelligence to Russian strategic forces while simultaneously providing Russian intelligence to private military contractors. They've been profiting from both sides while pushing both sides toward direct confrontation." Hartwell was rapidly processing the implications. "And today's operation is designed to trigger the confrontation they've been orchestrating." "Exactly. Nuclear confrontation in the Baltic region would justify massive defense spending increases, necessitate expanded private military contractor involvement, and create strategic conditions that would benefit the network's financial backers for decades." President Caldwell's voice cut through their discussion with presidential authority. "Colonel Chen, you have authorization to proceed with neutralization of the network leadership. Use whatever force is necessary to prevent transmission of the targeting coordinates." "Understood, Madam President." Rebecca turned to her communication systems and began issuing rapid orders to her positioned assets. "All teams, this is Phoenix Base. You have executive authorization for full engagement. Primary objective is capture of network leadership. Secondary objective is securing all communication systems and intelligence materials." The response from her operatives was immediate and coordinated. Eagle Eye confirms authorization received, moving to engagement position. Raven's Nest confirms, initiating communication intercept protocols. Shadow confirms, preparing to breach communication hub. Spectre confirms, Overwatch in position, clear fields of fire established. Morrison was watching the coordination with something approaching awe. "Colonel, the precision of this operation. How long have you been planning for this exact scenario?" "Deputy Secretary, we've been adapting our planning continuously for 3 years, but the core operational structure has been in place since 6 months after I began the assignment." President Caldwell's voice returned their attention to the screen. "Colonel Chen, I want to be clear about something for our Pentagon colleagues. The authority you're exercising today represents the culmination of one of the most successful deep cover operations in American intelligence history." General Kellaway looked between Rebecca and the President with new respect. "Madam President, the resources required, the international coordination necessary. This represents a level of strategic thinking that's exceptional even by special operations standards." "General, Colonel Chen didn't just accept this assignment. She designed the operational structure that made it possible. The network we're neutralizing today was identified, tracked, and penetrated using methodologies that she developed specifically for this type of threat." Rebecca was monitoring multiple communication feeds simultaneously, her attention split between the briefing and the ongoing tactical operation. Madam President, we have confirmation that all primary targets are in position at the communication hub. Request final authorization for engagement. President Caldwell's response was immediate and unequivocal. Authorization confirmed. Execute the operation. Rebecca turned to her communication systems with the focused intensity of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. All teams, this is Phoenix Base. You have executive authorization. Execute, execute, execute. The displays around Rebecca immediately began showing real-time footage from her operatives' tactical cameras. The Pentagon officials found themselves watching a precision military operation unfold in real time, conducted by assets they hadn't known existed under authority they hadn't believed was real. "My God," Morrison whispered, watching professional operators move with coordinated precision against targets in multiple countries simultaneously. "This is really happening." Odios. Screen. President Caldwell watched the operation with the calm focus of someone who had authorized such actions before. Deputy Secretary, what you're witnessing is why executive action authority exists. Some threats require responses that move faster than conventional diplomatic and military processes allow. As the tactical operation continued, General Kellaway found himself studying Rebecca with new understanding. "Colonel, the level of operational control you're maintaining, the international coordination, the precision timing, this isn't just military excellence, this is strategic genius." Rebecca's response came without taking her attention from the ongoing operation. "General, when you're tracking a network that has penetrated the highest levels of Allied intelligence, you either develop capabilities that exceed their expectations, or you fail and watch the world burn." Through it all, the truth that none of the Pentagon officials could any longer deny was becoming undeniably clear. Colonel Rebecca Chen wasn't just a decorated military officer who had stumbled onto important intelligence. She was an executive action operative operating under direct presidential authority, commanding resources and capabilities that officially didn't exist, executing a mission that had been 3 years in the careful, methodical planning. The quiet woman who had been dismissed and mocked earlier in the morning was revealing herself to be one of the most capable and authorized operatives in American intelligence history. The tactical displays in Conference Room 2A347 erupted with coordinated action as Rebecca's 3-year operation reached its climactic moment. Across Eastern Europe, her carefully positioned assets moved with precision that spoke to years of planning and preparation. The Pentagon officials watched in stunned silence as what had begun as a questionable intelligence briefing transformed into one of the most sophisticated military operations they had ever witnessed. "Eagle Eye, breach complete," came the first report from Tallinn. "Network leadership secured, no casualties among friendlies." "Raven's Nest, communication intercept successful," reported the Warsaw team. "We have complete access to their transmission systems." "Shadow, communication hub neutralized," confirmed the Riga operative. "All targeting coordinates secured before transmission." Rebecca coordinated the reports with calm efficiency, but the relief in her voice was unmistakable. After 3 years of careful preparation, the mission that had cost 7 lives was finally reaching successful completion. President Caldwell's voice carried clear satisfaction as she addressed both Rebecca and the assembled Pentagon officials. "Outstanding work, Colonel Chen. You've prevented what could have been a nuclear crisis in the Baltic region." General Kellaway was staring at the tactical displays with something approaching awe. "Colonel, the coordination, the precision, the intelligence preparation, this operation will be studied in war colleges for decades." "If it's ever declassified," Rebecca replied with a slight smile. "Which it won't be." Deputy Secretary Morrison was processing the full scope of what he'd witnessed. "Colonel Chen, I owe you an apology. We all do. When you entered this room, we treated you as a questionable intelligence source. What you've proven is that you're one of the most capable operatives in American military history." Rebecca's expression softened slightly, showing glimpses of the person beneath the operational facade. "Deputy Secretary, you were protecting classified systems from an unverified source. That was exactly what you should have done." "No, Morrison insisted, standing from his chair and moving around the conference table toward Rebecca. What we did was make assumptions based on rank and appearance rather than evidence and capability. As Morrison approached, his posture shifted into something the room recognized immediately, the formal stance that preceded military honors. He came to attention and raised his hand in a sharp, precise salute. "Colonel Rebecca Chen," Morrison announced, his voice carrying throughout the secure chamber, "it has been an honor witnessing your service to our nation." The gesture was unprecedented. Deputy Secretaries of Defense didn't salute colonels under normal circumstances. But as everyone in the room understood, nothing about Rebecca's situation had been normal. General Kellaway was next, rising from his chair and moving to join Morrison. His salute was accompanied by words that carried the weight of a career spent evaluating military excellence. "Colonel, in 30 years of service, I have never witnessed operational planning and execution of this caliber. Your country is in your debt." CIA Deputy Director Hartwell, though civilian, stood and offered his own gesture of respect, a formal bow that acknowledged Rebecca's extraordinary achievement. "Colonel Chen, the intelligence operation you've conducted represents the gold standard for protecting national security interests." On the main screen, President Caldwell watched the unprecedented display of recognition with evident satisfaction. "Colonel Chen, you're witnessing something that rarely occurs in classified operations: public acknowledgement of exceptional service." Rebecca stood among the saluting officials, her own posture automatically responding to the military honors being displayed. For someone who had spent 3 years operating in complete isolation, cut off from normal military recognition and advancement, the moment carried profound emotional weight. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying more emotion than she had allowed herself to show during the entire crisis. "But I want to be clear about something. This operation succeeded because of the 7 people who died obtaining the intelligence that made it possible. They deserve the recognition, not me." Morrison lowered his salute, but maintained his position of respect. "Colonel, those people died because they believed their sacrifice would serve a larger purpose. You've honored their sacrifice by ensuring their intelligence was used to protect American lives and prevent nuclear confrontation." The communication displays around Rebecca continued, showing the successful conclusion of the operation. Her assets were systematically securing intelligence materials, documenting the network's structure, and preparing evidence that would dismantle the entire criminal organization. President Caldwell's voice returned their attention to the screen. "Colonel Chen, there's one more matter we need to address: your status going forward." Rebecca turned to face the president directly. "Madam President, I'm ready to return to normal military service or accept whatever assignment serves the national interest." "Colonel, after 3 years of independent operation under the most challenging circumstances possible, you've proven capabilities that far exceed normal military service. I'm offering you a choice." The room fell silent as everyone understood they were witnessing a career-defining moment. "You can return to conventional military service with a promotion and assignment commensurate with your demonstrated abilities," President Caldwell continued. "Or you can accept permanent assignment to executive action operations with authority and resources to address threats that conventional military structures can't handle." General Kellaway leaned forward intently. "Madam President, are you offering Colonel Chen permanent executive action authority?" "I'm offering her the opportunity to institutionalize the capabilities she's developed over the past 3 years, to create a formal structure for the kind of operations she's proven can be successful." Rebecca considered this carefully, her mind working through the implications of both options. "Madam President, if I accept the executive action assignment, what would be the operational parameters?" "Complete autonomy to identify and counter threats that move faster than conventional government response systems can handle. Direct presidential reporting authority. Resources allocated at your discretion. Essentially, you would be creating and leading a new category of national security response." Morrison was studying Rebecca with new understanding. "Colonel, you're being offered the opportunity to become something that's never existed before. A permanent executive action commander with independent operational authority. The position would be classified at levels that would make your existence unknown to most of the government, President Caldwell added. Your operations would be invisible, your successes unacknowledged publicly, but the impact on national security would be profound. Rebecca looked around the conference room at the officials who had witnessed her operation, who had seen the kind of results that were possible when someone operated with the authority and resources necessary to counter sophisticated threats. "Madam President," she said finally, "I accept the executive action assignment." The decision was met with nods of approval from everyone present. Morrison stepped forward again, his expression carrying respect that bordered on reverence. "Colonel Chen, or should I say, Executive Action Commander Chen, it will be an honor to coordinate with your operations when they intersect with Pentagon activities." Rebecca's smile was slight but genuine. "Deputy Secretary, I suspect you'll never know when our operations intersect. That's the point." As the tactical displays showed the final stages of Rebecca's successful operation, a new communication alert appeared on the conference room systems. General Kellaway frowned as he read the incoming message, his expression shifting from satisfaction to concern. "We have an issue," he announced to the room. "Assistant Secretary of Defense James Worthington is demanding immediate access to this briefing. He's claiming authority to review all classified operations being conducted from Pentagon facilities." Rebecca's expression hardened immediately. "General, what level of clearance does Assistant Secretary Worthington hold?" "Umbra 6, which technically gives him oversight authority for most classified Pentagon operations." President Caldwell's voice cut through the discussion from the main screen. "Colonel Chen, is there something about Assistant Secretary Worthington that concerns you?" Rebecca was rapidly accessing intelligence databases on her terminal, cross-referencing information with the network intelligence her operation had just secured. "Madam President, I need 90 seconds to verify something." As Rebecca worked, the conference room door opened with the sharp authority of someone accustomed to immediate access. Assistant Secretary James Worthington strode into the chamber, his expensive suit and perfectly styled silver hair radiating the confidence of someone who had never been denied entry to any government facility. "Deputy Secretary Morrison," Worthington announced without preamble, "I'm assuming direct oversight of this operation under my authority as Assistant Secretary for Special Operations. Whatever briefing is being conducted here falls under my purview." Morrison looked uncomfortable, clearly uncertain about the proper protocol when executive action authority intersected with normal Pentagon hierarchy. "Assistant Secretary Worthington, this briefing involves presidential authority that may supersede normal oversight procedures." Worthington's gaze fell on Rebecca, who was still working at the communications terminal, and his expression shifted to something between irritation and condescension. "And you are?" "Colonel Rebecca Chen, United States Air Force," Rebecca replied without turning from her work. "Colonel, you're operating classified systems without proper authorization. I'm ordering you to cease all activities and provide a complete briefing on whatever operation you're conducting." Rebecca's hands paused on the interface. When she turned to face Worthington, her expression carried a quality that made everyone in the room instinctively step back. "Assistant Secretary," she said quietly, "what makes you believe you have authority over executive action operations?" Worthington's face flushed red with indignation. "Colonel, I have Umbra 6 clearance and direct oversight responsibility for all special operations conducted under Pentagon authority. You will comply with my orders immediately." General Kellaway cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Assistant Secretary, Colonel Chen has been operating under presidential authority that may not fall under normal oversight procedures." "There is no authority higher than properly constituted government oversight," Worthington snapped. "This woman is clearly conducting unauthorized operations using Pentagon resources, and I'm shutting it down immediately." Rebecca had returned to her terminal and was now studying intelligence reports with intense focus. When she looked up again, her expression had changed completely. The professional neutrality was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. "Assistant Secretary Worthington," she said, her voice carrying new authority, "you need to leave this conference room immediately." Worthington's reaction was explosive. Colonel, you are absolutely out of line. I'm placing you under arrest for conducting unauthorized operations and insubordination to a senior defense official. He reached for his secure phone, presumably to call for military police, but stopped when Rebecca's next words cut through the room with surgical precision. Assistant Secretary, the network we just neutralized included financial transfers to an account registered under your wife's maiden name. Transfers totaling $2.3 million over the past 18 months. The room fell absolutely silent. Worthington's face went white, his hand frozen halfway to his phone. That's impossible, he stammered. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but we also have communication intercepts showing coordination between your office and the network leadership, Rebecca continued relentlessly, including advance warning about NATO operational plans that resulted in the deaths of American service members in Syria. Morrison was staring at Worthington with horrified understanding. James, please tell me this isn't true. Worthington's composure was crumbling rapidly. This is all fabricated. This woman is obviously unstable, conducting unauthorized intelligence operations, making wild accusations. Sir, General Kellaway interrupted, studying his own intelligence terminal. The financial records Colonel Chen referenced are confirmed in our systems. The communication intercepts are authenticated by Pentagon cybersecurity protocols. President Caldwell's voice from the main screen carried absolute authority. Assistant Secretary Worthington, you are hereby suspended from all duties pending investigation by Pentagon Internal Affairs and the FBI. Security personnel are being dispatched to escort you from this facility. Worthington looked around the room desperately, seeking support that was clearly not coming, his gaze fixed on Rebecca with something approaching hatred. You have no idea what you're interfering with, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. There are strategic considerations beyond your understanding, operations that require— Sir, Rebecca interrupted, the only thing I interfered with was your network's plan to trigger nuclear confrontation for profit. The strategic considerations I understand perfectly. As if summoned, military police appeared at the conference room door. Worthington's shoulders sagged in defeat as he realized his situation was hopeless. Assistant Secretary Worthington, the lead MP announced, you're being detained for investigation of security violations and potential treason. Please come with us. As the military police escorted Worthington from the room, he turned back for one final comment directed at Rebecca. You think you've won something, Colonel, but there are networks within networks. This is just the beginning. Rebecca's response was cold and final. Sir, your network is finished. Every asset, every financial account, every communication system, we have it all. The beginning you're referring to is the beginning of justice for everyone who died because of your greed. After Worthington was removed, the conference room fell into contemplative silence. Morrison was the first to speak, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and disgust. How long have you known about Worthington's involvement? Rebecca returned to her terminal, bringing up intelligence files that showed a comprehensive investigation into the network's Pentagon connections. We've been tracking financial anomalies in his accounts for 6 months, but we needed confirmation of active coordination before we could act. General Kellaway was studying the evidence with professional interest. The communication intercepts, the financial transfers, this represents a level of penetration into Pentagon security that's frankly terrifying. General, Worthington was just one node in a network that included personnel from multiple allied nations. We've identified 17 individuals with security clearances who were actively sharing intelligence with the network. Hartwell looked up from his own intelligence review with grim satisfaction. And now we have evidence to prosecute all of them. President Caldwell's voice returned their attention to the main screen. Colonel Chen, the investigation and prosecution of this network will take months, possibly years, but the immediate threat has been neutralized thanks to your operation. Rebecca nodded, but her expression remained serious. Madam President, neutralizing this network was necessary but not sufficient. The vulnerability that allowed them to penetrate Allied intelligence systems still exists. which is why your new assignment will be to develop systematic countermeasures to prevent future penetrations of this type. As the immediate crisis concluded, and the various officials began processing the magnitude of what they had witnessed, Rebecca allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The 3-year operation that had cost 7 lives destroyed her normal military career and isolated her from everything she'd once known had achieved its objectives. But more than that, it had proven that when conventional government systems moved too slowly to address sophisticated threats, there were alternatives. Dangerous alternatives that required extreme authority and exceptional people, but alternatives nonetheless. 6 weeks after the crisis in Conference Room 2A347, the Pentagon had settled into a new rhythm that reflected lessons learned from Rebecca Chen's extraordinary operation. The changes were subtle but profound, visible only to those with sufficient clearance to understand what had transpired during those crucial hours. Deputy Secretary Morrison stood in his redesigned office, studying intelligence reports that now included input from sources that officially didn't exist. The integration of Rebecca's intelligence network with conventional Pentagon systems had created capabilities that were already proving invaluable in preventing international conflicts before they developed into crises. "The early warning system is working exactly as designed," he told General Kellaway during their weekly briefing. "We're identifying potential threat networks months before they become operational." Kellaway nodded, comparing current intelligence assessments with historical data from before Rebecca's integration. "The improvement in intelligence quality is remarkable. It's like having eyes and ears in places we never knew we needed to monitor." Through the office's secure windows, they could see the Pentagon's normal bustle of activity, but both men knew that beneath the visible operations, a new layer of capability was operating with the kind of effectiveness that only became apparent in what didn't happen, the crises that were prevented, the conflicts that were diffused before they began. Rebecca herself had become something of a legend within the classified community, though her actual identity remained known to fewer than 30 people worldwide. Her new assignment had evolved into something that transcended simple executive action authority. She had become the architect of an entirely new approach to national security. "Have you seen the latest operational report?" Morrison asked, handing Kellaway a classified folder with markings that indicated its contents were beyond most Pentagon clearances. Kellaway opened the folder to reveal maps, intelligence, summaries, and operational updates from locations around the globe. "Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, North Africa. She's operating on 3 continents simultaneously. 4, actually. We just received confirmation of successful operations in South America as well. The network she's developed has capabilities that exceed anything we've ever fielded." The scope of Rebecca's operations had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. What had begun as a focused effort to counter a specific threat network had evolved into a comprehensive system for identifying and neutralizing sophisticated threats before they could mature into international crises. President Caldwell had visited the Pentagon twice to review Rebecca's expanded operations, each visit resulting in increased authority and resources for what was becoming known in the most classified circles as Strategic Prevention Initiative. "The President's support has been unwavering," Morrison noted. "She understands that preventing conflicts is more effective and less costly than responding to them after they develop." Kellaway was studying operational maps that showed Rebecca's assets positioned throughout regions of strategic concern. "The positioning is remarkable. She's anticipated threat development patterns that our conventional intelligence services missed entirely." A secure communication alert interrupted their discussion. Morrison activated his classified terminal to receive an encrypted message that made his eyebrows rise significantly. "What is it?" Kellaway asked. "Another success. Rebecca's team just prevented what could have been a major incident in the South China Sea. Chinese and Philippine naval forces were being maneuvered into confrontational positions by external actors seeking to create an international incident." "How did she resolve it?" Morrison read through the operational summary with growing amazement. "She provided intelligence to both sides that revealed the external manipulation while simultaneously neutralizing the actors who were orchestrating the confrontation, Both navies withdrew to normal patrol positions without ever realizing how close they came to conflict. It was classic Rebecca Chen methodology: prevent the crisis by removing the underlying cause while allowing all parties to maintain face and avoid escalation. The elegance of her approach is what sets her apart, Kellaway observed. She doesn't just solve problems, she solves them in ways that prevent similar problems from developing in the future. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of CIA Deputy Director Hartwell, who entered with the slightly dazed expression that had become common among officials who worked with Rebecca's operations. "You're not going to believe what just happened," he announced without preamble. Morrison and Kellaway exchanged glances. Working with Rebecca had taught them to expect the unexpected. "The European intelligence assessment we've been struggling with for 6 months," Hartwell continued. "The one involving potential Russian penetration of NATO communication systems? Rebecca solved it in 72 hours. "How?" Morrison asked, though he suspected the answer would be typically Rebecca: comprehensive, elegant, and effective in ways that seemed almost impossible. "She didn't just identify the penetration, she fed false intelligence through the compromised systems to identify the complete network of compromised personnel. Then she provided evidence to European authorities that allowed them to clean house without any public acknowledgement that security had been breached." Kellaway shook his head in admiration. "She turned the security breach into a counterintelligence operation that actually strengthened NATO security." "Exactly. And she did it without creating any diplomatic incidents, embarrassing any allied governments, or compromising any ongoing operations." The pattern was consistent across all of Rebecca's operations: problems solved comprehensively, with minimal public visibility and maximum strategic benefit. She had developed what amounted to a new form of statecraft, operating in the spaces between conventional diplomacy and military action. Morrison's secure phone rang with the distinctive tone that indicated direct contact from executive levels. He answered immediately, listened briefly, then looked at his colleagues with an expression that mixed pride and concern. That was the White House. "The President wants Rebecca to brief the National Security Council on threat prevention methodologies." "Public briefing?" Hartwell asked. "Closed session, highest classification levels only, but it would be the first time Rebecca's methodologies are shared beyond our immediate circle." The implications were significant. If Rebecca's approaches were adopted more broadly, they could reshape how the United States addressed international threats. But broader adoption would also mean larger operations, more resources, and increased visibility that could compromise the very secrecy that made her methods effective. "She'll resist," Kellaway predicted. "Her effectiveness depends on remaining invisible." "Probably. But the President is right. The capabilities Rebecca has developed are too valuable to remain limited to a single operation." As they discussed the potential expansion of Rebecca's influence, a new intelligence alert appeared on Morrison's secure terminal. He read the message quickly, then looked up with an expression that had become familiar to anyone who worked with Rebecca's operations: the mixture of relief and amazement that came from watching seemingly impossible problems resolve themselves elegantly. "What now?" Hartwell asked. "Middle East situation we've been monitoring, the one involving potential confrontation between Israeli and Iranian naval forces. Rebecca's team just diffused it by exposing the arms dealers who were providing intelligence to both sides while selling weapons that would have guaranteed casualties." Morrison handed the report to his colleagues. Both navies stood down when they realized they were being manipulated by people who profited from regional instability. The arms dealers are being arrested by international authorities, and the weapons shipments have been interdicted. "Another crisis that won't make the news because it was prevented rather than resolved," Kellaway observed, "which is exactly how Rebecca prefers it." As the three officials continued reviewing intelligence reports that showed the global impact of Rebecca's operations, they reflected on how fundamentally their understanding of national security had changed. The traditional model of responding to crises after they developed was being replaced by something far more sophisticated: the systematic prevention of crises through early intervention and strategic countermeasures. "The question," Morrison said finally, "is whether this model can be sustained long-term. Rebecca is exceptional, but she's still one person coordinating a global operation. She's been training others, Hartwell noted. The assets she's developed aren't just operatives, they're learning her methodologies. In 5 years, we could have a complete network of people capable of operating at her level. Calloway was studying global intelligence maps with new understanding. If that happens, if we can institutionalize these capabilities, we could be looking at a fundamental shift in how international conflicts develop, or more accurately, how they don't develop. The conversation was interrupted by Rebecca herself, entering Morrison's office through a door that most people didn't know existed. Her appearance was always preceded by the distinctive quiet that came from someone moving with exceptional awareness of their environment. "Gentlemen," she greeted them with the slight smile that had become familiar to the few people who worked with her regularly. "Colonel," Morrison replied, though her new assignment technically placed her outside normal military hierarchy. "We were just discussing your latest successes and the President's request for a National Security Council briefing," Calloway added. Rebecca's expression shifted to something more serious. "I've been thinking about that request. There are advantages to broader adoption of strategic prevention methodologies, but also significant risks." "Such as?" Hartwell asked. "Visibility. The moment these capabilities become known to a broader circle, they become targets for the same kind of network we just neutralized. Success in prevention requires remaining invisible to the threats you're preventing." Morrison nodded, understanding the dilemma. "But if these capabilities remain limited to you personally, they're vulnerable to single-point failure." "Which is why I've been developing something else," Rebecca said, moving to Morrison's secure terminal and accessing classified files that none of them had seen before. "A hybrid approach that preserves operational security while building broader capabilities." The display showed a training and development program that would create multiple independent cells capable of operating with Rebecca's methodologies while maintaining complete separation from each other. "Compartmentalized excellence," Calloway observed, "each cell capable of high-level operations but unaware of the other's existence." "Exactly. If one cell is compromised, the others continue operating. If I'm compromised, the entire capability doesn't disappear." Rebecca's planning had anticipated the very concerns they'd been discussing, and as usual, her solution was comprehensive, elegant, and effective. "How long to implement?" Morrison asked. "The first cells are already operational. What you've been seeing as my individual successes are actually the results of 4 independent cells operating in coordination. The South China Sea resolution, the European intelligence operation, the Middle East situation. Each was handled by different teams using shared methodologies." Hartwell stared at the organizational charts with amazement. "You've already created what we were discussing as a future possibility." "I've created the foundation. Full implementation will take another 18 months, but the capability already exists." As Rebecca outlined the scope and structure of what she'd developed, the officials realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in intelligence history: the creation of a new form of national security capability that operated outside conventional structures while achieving results that conventional structures couldn't match. "Colonel," Morrison said finally, "you've created something that will protect American interests for generations." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "I've created something that honors the sacrifice of 7 people who died believing their intelligence would protect American lives. Everything else is just implementation." If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where are you watching from and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget. As the meeting concluded and the officials returned to their regular duties, each carried with them a deeper understanding of how national security had evolved beyond anything they'd previously imagined. Rebecca Chen had done more than complete a successful operation. She had pioneered a new approach to protecting American interests that would influence international relations for decades to come. The woman who had been dismissed and mocked during a Pentagon briefing 6 weeks earlier had proven to be one of the most consequential military leaders in modern history. And like all the best strategic victories, her success would be measured not in headlines or public recognition, but in the conflicts that never happened, The crises that never developed, the wars that never began. The quiet woman with the presidential seal had changed everything by ensuring that most people would never know she existed,